Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight. This is the meeting of Frome Town Council. I'm Philip Campagna and I'll be chairing this evening's meeting. Just to remind everyone, we've got people online and here in the room. For those in the room, a little housekeeping as usual. The emergency exit is in the rear corner of the room and the assembly point is the far side of the car park. Toilets are at the end of the corridor on the right, and there is an accessible toilet to the right of the lift. Help yourselves, as I've said before, to tea and coffee during the meeting. Tonight, Paul will clerk, and Laura, Sarah, and Becca will manage the minutes, question boards, participant settings, and the IT generally. The meeting will be recorded, and we are live streaming to our YouTube channel. For those councillors attending by Zoom, please use the yellow hand, and for anyone else, ask questions through the Q&A board. First on the agenda, Paul, absences, apologies therefore.
Yes, we have apologies from Andy Jones and Carla Coronet.
Okay. And, okay, all apologies? Yep. Fiona is proposing.
That's unanimous.
Who seconded it?
Who seconded it?
Mark Dorrington. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to a special item this evening, if I may. Oh, sorry, I'm going too fast. Paul, minutes of the last meeting.
We'll just do declarations of interest first, shall we? And then do the minutes.
Okay. Any declarations of interest?
Thank you.
Many councillors, anybody? Nope, thank you all very much. Minutes of last meeting held Wednesday, October the 4th. Any questions? No? Can we pass those? Propose Anne Hills, seconded Steve Tanner.
That's unanimous too.
I can go now. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Special award this evening, a civic award. It is my privilege this evening to honour Mike Bishop for all his years of commitment and service as town crier for Frome. Mike became town crier of Frome on Easter Saturday, April 2006. 2 days later, he took part in the first of many town crier competitions. A member of the ancient and honourable Guild of Town Criers, Mike has served as membership secretary and also as the Guild's standard bearer. As standard bearer, Mike represented Frome at many competitions in the UK and also in Holland and Belgium. We also thank Angie, who has been at Mike's side throughout. This year alone, Mike and Angie have attended 10 town crier competitions. This is a display, there is a display of many pictures of Mike and Angie and their regalia here in the town hall downstairs. So please take time if you can at some point to have a look at that. It's really impressive. Mike has worked tirelessly as Frome Town Crier and to make Frome Town Crier Festival a success. So on behalf of Frome Town Council, I'd like to thank Mike and Angie for all that they have done and wish them the very best, Mike, for your retirement. So if you'd like to come up, please.
Mike?
No, I'd just like to say a big thank you for this award tonight. It does mean a lot to me. It has been hard to make the decision to step down, but as I've said in the paper, things have dwindled off a lot for the town crier, which I find sad. Hopefully, we will be getting a new crier, I hope, because I'd hate to see the tradition stop. I will back any new town crier, whether it be a male, female, 100%, and give them all my support. The regalia that is downstairs will stay with the council. I have got 2 more regalia at home that I am prepared to give to any new town crier. Obviously, they'll have to be my size for the the only one that will not be going is the one that's on the picture here today. That means so much to me. It is my last outfit that I made, and it is as far as I know, because it's from a black and white picture, of my great-great-grandfather, who became town crier of Payhenbury and Newton Potterford in Devon in the mid-1800s when he came back from war. And I would imagine it was British red coat, that's why I made it in that design, that colour. That one I will be wearing once more, but somebody will be dressing me in it because I'll be in my box. I have got that on my will, that is the outfit I'm going to be cremated in. I think Angie, probably after me, will be doing the same with our outfits. So it has been fantastic 17.5 years. I never ever thought that I'd enjoy it as much as I have done. When I took it on, I thought, oh yeah, we'll give it a go. But it is something that really gets into you. But I have seen 2 or 3 criers lately. Again, this is in the paper, I think, with the write-up I've done. 2 or 3 criers older than myself have retired and now are too immobile to do anything else. So both me and Angie wanted to make sure that we could do other things in our life after town crying. I am the secretary of Frome Selwood Bowling, the best one, not the park one. So Frome Selwood Bowling Club, I'm the secretary there. We both love playing bowls. We joined the National Trust August 2022, and because of all our commitments, we haven't been to anywhere yet, but hopefully now next year, without town choir competitions to go to, we might be able to do some of that. So thank you once again. This does mean a lot to me. This will be a private place. I do thank you all. Thank you very much.
Okay, now we come to questions, comments from the public, please, if we may.
I've got a comment about your report.
Do you want to do that when we come to that in a minute? Yeah, is that okay? Thank you.
Frome resident. I'm glad to see that in the centre of Cheap Street, somebody has found the wherewithal to affix a lamp bulb in the centre bracket, so that now Cheap Street is slightly more illuminated at night, whereas before it was highly dark and dangerous. I'm also glad to note that somebody has also managed to fund the wherewithal for a lamp bulb in one of the street lamps in Vicarage Street, so that equally Vicarage Street is less dangerous now for coming back from the railway. However, if you go to King Street near Marks and Spencer's, there are 5 street lamps, none of which have any lamp bulbs in them. I would be grateful if somebody could find wherewithal to fund a lamp bulb. Next, I would like to participate in litter picks and hoedowns, but I have looked on various websites and can find no information as to when the next one might be.
I think Shane is your go-to for hoedowns, definitely.
Thank you.
And we'll pass on to the Highways Authority that there are some light bulbs missing in King Street, unless Anne can better me on that one.
No, I can add to your list. I have reported it on Fix My Street, which is probably the best place to report missing light bulbs. There's another one on church steps, and I'm aware that with the Christmas Light the Night event, it would be nice to light people's way home after that event as well. And I think it was the same problem this time last year, where we had to use some of our high-vis tabards to mark particularly that lamp halfway up church steps. And I don't know, but it's obviously outside someone's house, and I don't know whether they find it particularly annoying, but it needs a light bulb in it as well.
Just to remind everyone, these is the responsibility, unless it's a private street light, it's the Highways Authority, but we'll pass that on to them. Yes.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, with regard to the lamps in Cheap Street, they were out since March this year. And we had a local resident who knew the street very well and wasn't inebriated, who fell into the leat and raised the complaint initially. It all fell to SS&E, the people who supply electricity to the street rather than the lamps themselves. They have finally got most of them turned on this week or last week after a lot of pushing by myself and the Somerset councillors to get that done. We now have contacts at Somerset, so if you pass the details to the council, we will make sure that it gets sent to the right person there. The person to contact is your Somerset councillor for the areas you're talking about, because they will put pressure on the people to get these lights fixed. And all but one in Cheap Street has now been fixed, so they're working their way through it. With regard to Hoedown, that's Shane, but the people who do the litter picks are called the Frome Litter Warriors. And if you send an email to the town council, especially to Nikki Mehta, she'll put you in touch with them.
Thank you, Mark, for that update. Any other comments from public? Okay, any comments from councillors, please? Nick and then Fiona.
Thank you. It's actually a comment to Dawn in response to your report, if that's okay. I just want to say, first of all, that I generally find your reports really informative and really helpful and really factual, and they've been really, really useful. I was slightly disappointed with this one, particularly the bit around Somerset Council's finances and what has gone wrong. I think that I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on this, and I know that we're discussing it later, but my understanding is that there are a number of councils around the country that are in dire financial straits, so it's clearly a systemic issue, and it's also, and it's also probably something to do with, and also related to our current government from the last 12 years as well. There's a lot of bigger issues rather than just this new administration. We're, an independent town council. I'm not a member of any party myself, but personally, I found your report, that little bit of it, it felt like it was party political point scoring. And I think that we should be careful about what we publish on the website if we are going to be uploading reports from Somerset councillors, and that we should be careful about doing that. But I really appreciate all the work you put into the reports. But yeah, I was quite...
Okay, thanks, Fiona. Nick, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Dawn, thank you again for the report. Note about the swimming pool, great, as a keen user of that leisure centre. Do we know how much we're going to go or when it'll be paid? Okay, because at the moment they're restricted hours for swimming and stuff like that. They've closed it. Okay, thanks. The other thing was, from the minutes, there was an action to contact Somerset County Council about the crossing points. I don't know if we've had a response at all from that, please, Chair or Paul.
I'm just looking around for a face that could answer that? I can't, and in Peter's absence, I'm afraid I can't. Sorry. Shane, is it? Yeah.
Shane, you got something on that?
Thanks. Yeah, just an update on Frome Hoedown. We sort of link up via the Frome Hoedown Facebook page, which is not particularly brilliant because everyone's never quite sure who's getting the messages. But generally, we go out the last Sunday of each month, and anybody can ask or offer help via the Facebook page to go out any other time. Lots of people do seem to have been doing their own little bits of pavements, and we've been out around Portway recently, but I'm glad to hear there's a new town ranger who's sort of looking at that, so I'm hoping to meet up with him and Nick. Yeah, and just sort of get a bit of revitalised energy into Hoedown. We obviously had the summer off, but it's generally spring and autumn where we burst into life, and we've been a bit slow to burst into life this year. So yeah, any help appreciated, and the Facebook page is a place to ask or offer.
Thank you for that, Shane. Any other comments from councillors? Steve?
Thanks, Philip. Just wondered if there was an update on the finger posts that we talk about quite a lot. And I know Jane's here, which is why I asked the question.
There is an update on the finger posts. They are due to be installed on the 27th, so which is a Monday. Which is a Monday, and they should be finished by the Wednesday of that week. However, no, I'm just kidding this time.
Okay. Helen? Yep.
Just to say that I'm sure most of you are aware that over the summer we are looking to reallocate 505 houses in what was the district of Mendip, and I've met with Jane Llewellyn to discuss it. We've seen the bids that have come in as councillors. Dawn, myself and Shane went, and Michael Dunk, to the council offices about 3 weeks ago and saw the bids that have come in. They're now going to be looked at by council officers who are going to sort of give them a sustainability appraisal to see what they will recommend as to where these houses are going to go. So these are in addition to the ones that are in the local plans part 1 and 2. Oh, hello, Adam's here. He'll know about this as well. At the moment, parish and town councils are not being informed formally. They won't be told until the officers have made their judgment. But Jane does know roughly where they are. And I was wondering, I will talk to Max about this at our steering group at a later stage, well, probably this week. But the LCN might be an opportunity, might be a forum where we can discuss that. There are some dangers to that, because then, it could end up being a bun fight where people from Packsaddle argue with people from Stop Selwood Garden Village, so we've got to just think about the best way to do that if we do decide to have that kind of discussion, or whether we do it through the formal means which Somerset Council would prefer us to go through. So we do need to think about whether or not we want to open up and be more facilitative about how we decide where those houses are going to go, and whether we go with the officer recommendations or whether we argue against those officer recommendations. Okay.
Thanks very much, Helen. Hi, Adam. I'm just going to go to Dawn first, and I'll come to you, Adam. Anything else that you'd like to add? Thank you for your report, having sent that ahead. Happy? Okay, thanks very much. Good evening, Adam.
Is that working? Is that working? Yes. Hi. I think everything I was going to say either has been covered, including by Helen and Dawn's report, or it will be covered later on. I think the only other thing is some potentially good news is that conversations have started between Somerset Council and Mayday Saxonvale. So I'm hoping for something positive to come out of that. Thanks. Lisa.
Are Somerset having conversations with Acorn as well?
They always have been, because they've been in a contract with them. I don't think that hasn't ended yet. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got Shane and then Steve.
And just after the recent court case, Andre Sestini suspects that Acorn will put in a revised application.
Okay, thank you. Steve?
Thanks for it. Just going back on Helen's point, actually, I can sort of understand why Somerset don't want to involve the parishes at this stage, but I don't know, I just think we're in a reasonably unique position with a sort of plan advisory committee here that we've probably got an awful lot that we can offer Somerset, which perhaps some of the other parishes can't. And I think it would be really useful for them and for us and for everyone else if they did actually engage with us now rather than wait until they've decided which ones they're going to pick, because a lot of those officers don't actually come to Frome. So it would be good if they got a bit of info from people who do sort of look at planning here.
Do you want to put a motion forward to suggest that that happens, or do you want to discuss it amongst yourselves at a later stage? I mean, I could take that back. But the other thing is, because they have to all be, these houses and dwellings all have to be deliverable by 2029, and the phosphates problem in the west, to the west of Shepton Mallet is not, or the west of Dalting has not really been solved properly yet. It means that a lot of those dwellings are likely to be around Frome and to the south of Midsummer Norton. So therefore we are in a unique position. And I think that the Town Council and the LCN, because some of them could be, are not actually within the Frome boundary, they're in Selwood or to the slightly to the west or around Colford or whatever. So we kind of need to, you know, I'm just looking for a way to engage people generally. I'm not quite sure how we should do that. Yeah.
Paul, maybe we can take it offline and send a formal request to Somerset Council on that behalf, working with Jane and whatever. That makes sense, rather than go through it now. Okay. Oh, let's talk. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Steve. Any other comments? Okay. We come now to item 4, current financial emergency at Somerset Council and possible impact on Frome. I'm going to hand this over to Paul, and then Paul will, I think, decisions been made that he will be presenting this with Max and probably looking at 4 and 5 together as we roll on. Thank you.
Oh, it's a bit small. It's a bit small for me. I'm going to stand here because I can't read my writing at the back. I just thought it was important to this point just to sort of put a bit of introduction onto the discussion about the financial emergency that Somerset Council finds itself in, and as Max will follow on with, just to sort of begin the discussion within this council about how we respond to that. But don't be mistaken that this is a flash in the pan. It is really serious. I don't want to kind of sort of set fires going or anything like that, but having to save 100 million, which is what they identified at their executive committee last week, is a big chunk of cash. And talking to a lot of the senior officers over the last fortnight or more at Somerset Council, they are really, really working hard to try and find where those savings were made. And it, as I say in my report, it could well be brutal. So that point there about services are going to be cut and services are going to be removed. It's not an overstatement. On the positive side, if there is one in this discussion, as Bill Revans said in the letter to parish councils last week, they want to work with the parish sector to develop, as it says, a prioritised programme of devolution. Now, I don't think I'm breaking any confidence. They don't know what that is. That's not being critical of them. They really don't know what it is. And it's up to us, to an extent, to propose things to them. And then they'll think about that and we'll kind of to it and fro in a bit until we get to a point where both us as a parish council and other parish councils, because there could be some group work going on here, come to a conclusion about what things might be devolved, what things are important. So there's, very briefly there, was sort of what are we going to do about it? How are we going to respond? One little bit of context here. We talk about services and we talk about assets. So assets are things, obviously, and that could be, for example, the library building. And out of the library building comes the library service. Now, again, open spaces are assets, and the services provided by open spaces are sort of health, wellbeing, and recreation services. I think that might be important for us to remember as we go through the process, because it's not just about taking a load of assets or taking a load of services. There's this kind of grey area in this overlap between assets that provide services. I'm not sure if I'm just getting a bit hung up on that, but you know. So sort of context of it, you know, we don't really know, and they don't. Somerset Council doesn't really know at the moment what all this means. We do know, I think, that there might be some specific services that we're interested in, but what we don't know is how much they cost, what Somerset Council is thinking about. If I was them, I'd be going, what are the really big ticket items here? What are the quick wins? And Max, I think we'll talk about the commercial estate, for example. That's we're talking millions there, as opposed to a saving of 50,000 or saving of 20. And they do reflect that in the discussion they had last week. So we don't really know yet what their priorities are. And, you know, we can guess. So what we need to do to be able to respond to that, we as a council and a community need to identify what our priorities are, and then take those to Somerset Council and go, okay, there's some discussion here. So, you know, what are you thinking? Is there overlap here? And we need to be confident that those priorities do chime with our community. Perhaps it's stated the very, very obvious, but we've all got opinions on what's important, but actually we need to overlay that and check with our community to ensure that what we're bidding for, if you like, on their behalf is something that they think is important too. And really, this is just to sort of get the juices flowing, and Max will follow on with a lot of this. But it's things like, there's the Ivy Verde contract in the town. The Ivy Verde contract covers street cleansing, so sweeping the streets, emptying the bins, and open space management. They cut the grass and manage the closed churchyard here next door, for example, and all the other open spaces and grass verges on roads in the town that we don't already own. And as I said earlier, there are perhaps some really interesting opportunities for us on some of the assets. The third one there is really interesting and very, very exciting to me. The library building, there are examples of sort of developing community libraries in the town, in the country. A scenario, maybe we sort of take on the library building, create a community hub and a community library, and lease back a bit of space for the library service. It's one model, and I'm not saying these are even suggestions, but as I say, just to get the juices flowing, there's a lot of interest, quite rightly, because it's got a long history in the Key Centre up on the Mount as well. I think there's something that needs to be done there, perhaps. And there are some key open spaces that Rob and me and Mark won't bore you to tears on. There's the early intervention stuff, and I know I won't say any more than that because I know Max is going to say more on that. There's the markets on the list that Bill Revens, the leader of Somerset Council, sort of sent us. You know, clearly there. Is anyone interested in taking on the markets? We've been whinging about the markets for much more than a decade. There may be time to stand up and be counted. There's bus services. Philip, is it the 30 that's subsidised by the county? Phew. I had to guess at that one today, but that's on the list as well. Sort of, they can't carry on, they say, subsidising public transport, which is odd. It's interesting, but do we respond to that? And one of the things that is, I know, a hot potato because Mendip tried to reduce the hours of the recycling centre a few years ago. I wonder whether that's on the hit list as well, to reducing the hours. by taking some of these things on, we'd have more control over them. And I think that's something, again, we've been whinging about that kind of thing for a long, long time. If we did it, we could do this. On the one hand, you careful what you wish for, but on the other hand, it does actually enable us to what we hope to be improved and look at them and providing services more imaginatively. So things to keep in mind, and then I'll hand over to Max. And this is primarily for councillors here. If we do want to respond to any of these things, we need to be thinking quickly, and we need to be thinking about how much to put into the precept demand come January. So, we've got a couple of months. It won't be the only bite of the cherry. There will be more bites of those cherries further on down the line. But the first opportunity to look at our budgets will be and agree a precept demand will be this time in January. Included in that, we will want to know what we're doing and what we might want to do less of to take on more services. So it's not just about upping the precept, it'll be looking at what we do already. And at that, I'll just hand over to you, Max.
Do you want to take some questions, yeah? Or...
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, and I know all the work that your managers are doing, Paul. And I also just want to make it clear that looking at raising the precept is not the only work that we're doing. We're looking at what the budgets look like, looking at things from a number of different ways, and looking at how we can deliver value on taking some of that on. So it's not just a straight, we'll raise the precept.
Thanks, Lisa. Over to you, Max.
Hello. So I think there are lots of different options, and the picture that Paul paints is quite a stark and difficult one for anybody to address. My contribution is just to go slightly deeper into this, because I kind of think we really need to understand what's happening here, and therefore what kind of problem we're involved in solving. Because I think it would be a mistake to think that we can just do this and it will be over, because I don't think it will be. I think this blight, if you like, this difficulty, will be with us for some time to come. And I want to just talk a bit about why that might be. So I want to do a number of different things. So I want to just talk about the national and local context, and that initial discussion between Dawn and Fiona is actually really interesting. It's like, is this a national problem or is this a local problem? Because we kind of do need to know. And I personally think it's a bit of both, but I'll kind of come to that in a second. I want to talk about some of the deeper causes and what are the implications for us of taking some of these things on, for example, because we're likely to take them on at significantly less cost, or almost it's significantly less expenditure, significantly more expenditure for us, either in whole or in part. So there may be some things that county just decide they're not going to do any longer. And the question is, like, if you want to carry it on, then you have to do this yourself. I think that then has really stark implications for us as an organisation, because we do a lot of things. We do a lot of things on the understanding that, even though we may complain about them a lot of the time, Somerset Council do have a whole offer, if you like, and a whole set of services that they provide. If they were to not provide them any longer, then I think it's a real question for us about whether we can continue to do a lot of the value-added, nice-to-have stuff that we've perhaps done in the past. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. So I'm going to delight you all with a kind of deep dive into some of the causal issues behind all of this, and talk about what the future might look like. Having done that, I'm then going to have a quick poetry break, because I think at that point you may be somewhat depressed, so the relevance of that will become apparent later on. I want to then talk about Bill's letter, because I think it's a really interesting letter, both for what it says and indeed what it does not say. And then I think I just, taking up on Paul's theme, some real opportunities which I do think present themselves through this, or potentially present themselves through this, and then some work about next steps, because it's really important that we are open and transparent in our debates about the kinds of things that we become interested in the future, and that we can involve as many people in those decisions as possible. So, forgive me, a bit of local government geekery at this particular stage. So is this a national problem or a local problem? Interesting. So what you have, and if people follow local government like I do, there are recent, so the thing on the 114 notice, which Paul talks about in his thing, which is essentially where your reserves are not sufficient to cover the gap in your expenditure. As soon as you get to that point, you're in 114 territory. And unless you can kind of put together a persuasive case to the Section 151 officer. It's great the way they do all this stuff, isn't it, really? To the chief finance officer, essentially. Unless you can put forward a persuasive case to him or her to say that we've got a way of closing this gap, they have to issue a 114 notice. There's no two ways about it. It kind of has to be done. If that gap exists and there's no credible plan to close it, then there's no option. And as Dawn's paper rightly says, that will then cost the council an awful lot of money. So potentially then commissioners will arrive using what are colloquially known as Henry VIII powers to essentially, and they can do all sorts of things. They can get rid of the senior leadership team, they can sack the council, they can do all sorts of things in order to be able to get the measures that they believe are necessary to bear. If you look at some of the places where this has happened recently, like the biggest high-profile one is probably Birmingham, that massively misjudged, miscounted an equal pay claim, which they thought it would cost it something like 120 million, ended up costing it 1.2 billion. Thurrock is well known for its extraordinary dabbles in the commercialisation market and has lost tens of millions of pounds doing all of that stuff. Woking, etc., etc. is a person I know really well called Tony McCardle, who's one of the commissioners, who says these are all councils that chose exotic solutions over hard work, which is a kind of interesting statement for him to make. He's a bit miserable, but I think he kind of has a point. However, Section 114 notices were originally pulled in by government to really kind of control rogue councils. So we're talking, Liverpool under Derek Hatton and all of those sorts of things. Councils that were clearly taking wrong and erroneous decisions, clearly costing taxpayers money when they didn't need to. They were the kind of rogue states, if you like, that Section 114 notices were designed for. However, they're now becoming quite commonplace. And if you look at the LGA watch list of how many councils are currently teetering on the brink of this, there are about 30 large councils doing this. Many of whom many of whom's leaders and whose chief executives I know, and I would absolutely not say that these are profligate or irresponsible organizations. So there is something else going on as well as some of the decisions that people take. There's also something about, there is, I think, as Fiona was quite rightly saying, a systemic problem. Many of the councils, and I'll just make this point, that are in trouble, pursued a commerciality agenda, and we'll come to that later because that's also happening here, that government encouraged. Didn't do it very well, but nevertheless, it was a thing that many councils were told almost to set out on a course to make themselves self-financing, those kinds of phrases. So they leveraged lots of assets. Lots of people set up things like energy companies in order to be able to try and create profits for themselves and therefore diminish the amount of savings they had to produce. And many of those then went spectacularly wrong. And so you end up in the position that you are in. And then against that backdrop of misbehaviour, we also have to take into account, we cannot not take into account 40% reductions in the overall funding of local government at the same time as a pandemic, at the same time as a kind of demographic time bomb around people, particularly people over 80. I'm glad to know at the age of 61 that's like 60s are not old any longer, but as soon as you get over 80, then statistically, the cost to the state is very significant, and none of our services were ever designed for this. This is the point that kind of Hilary Cotter makes all the time. The NHS was not designed for this, and local authorities weren't really designed for this. So that's the case as well. When I was at the London Borough of Barnet many years ago, I invented a thing called the graph of doom, which is this is my enduring legacy to the world. But it looks like this. Whoa. And everyone has one, so every council has its own version of it. And what it essentially says is the pink blob is all of the other things that councils spend their money on. All of the stuff in blue and dark blue and all of that is all to do with capital, but it's mostly to do with children's and adults' care. Okay? And the whole point there is that those services were always due because of demographic pressures to increase. And as soon as that happens, and as local government funding has gone down and down over the years, eventually that pink line disappears. In other words, councils cannot spend anything on anything else other than care services. And if you look at the Somerset crisis currently, that's kind of broadly what it says. But all of the other things and all of the other areas in which it may save money are actually minuscule compared to the adults and children's care budgets. And I'll kind of come to that in a second. So the graph of doom, and the other thing is to say, is if you look at the beginning of that graph of doom, it's in 2010. This is not a new phenomenon. This is a ongoing crisis which has been brewing for many years. And I think the point is now that the rope is so tight, if you like, that a single faltering move can mean that councils fall off the edge, and then it's actually very difficult for them to get back. So is it a national problem or is it a local problem? It's a national contextual problem, sometimes exacerbated by local issues and local choices. And I want to cover some of those as well, because there is a Somerset context to this, which also I don't think we can ignore. And if, again, like me, you're a bit of a local government geek and you actually read the Somerset Council papers, there's actually a very interesting annex to the current budget report that talks about the structural problem that Somerset faces. Just to say something about £100 million savings, it may actually not get to that. So I'm going to just demonstrate this. The way that council finances work, it is a bit like crocodile jaws. So it's like if you can close the gap early, then actually you don't necessarily get to the 100 million. That makes sense. So the quicker you take action, the kind of better it is. So 100 million is based on the forecast of not delivering savings this year and all of the pressures for next. So that doesn't have to be the case. But the bad news is that the 100 million that are talking about saving has to begin in April. So the council has to cost £100 million less in April, not at the end of next year, but at the beginning of next year. That's the crisis. That's the real difficulty that you face when you look at those kind of savings figures. Let's just talk about some of the structural issues because they are relevant. And I'm not making any political points about these. These are just facts. Okay, so Somerset has chosen over numbers of years to have a very low council tax base. So the average there is 1646, 1727 is the average. So if it were to increase its council tax to the average, it would net an additional £17 million revenue per year. It's quite big when you fashion that over a number of different years. Sorry, which figure are you looking at? Oh, 7, sorry, that's 70. I do beg your pardon, it's not that big, it's not that small. So the social care precept is a function of your council tax. So you can levy an additional precept as a percentage on top of your council tax. And again, because Somerset's council tax base is low, therefore its adult social care precept is low. And so there is an issue about the amount of money that Somerset gathers in, which is significantly lower than comparable councils.
Max, you said Somerset has chosen to levy a lower council tax. Am I right in thinking that they are all capped, unlike us at our level? They are capped, and that's what I picked up on Bill Revan's letter, that, of course, you're not capped, so go to your communities, you fill in the gap.
That's right.
That puts the pressure on us in our community
exactly right.
that we might get kicked out because we've raised the precept.
Yep.
Because they're putting all the pressure on us to do that because they're capped.
But what I'm trying to say, so that both of these things are true. So it's true that they can't raise council tax by more than a certain percentage now. But the historical origins of that are in a choice to have local council tax many years ago. And so you create this kind of what they call the gearing. In other words, the amount that you charge as a percentage of the overall burden of taxation. And that therefore means that you kind of come into it with a low base. And then when you're trying to increase it, it's really difficult to do that. So both those things are true. But it is true that somewhere along this line, Somerset went with a low tax base, despite the fact that it probably has quite high needs. And I'll kind of come to that in a second. So there's no real prospect of return to the average. You can't kind of do that now because you're capped, as you rightly say. So that isn't really an option. The other thing that's happening, of course, is that the way in which local government is financed changes quite significantly, and they will be much more reliant on business rates in the future. And that is also difficult in an economy like Somerset, which is low wage, low productivity, low skills, essentially. So there's a series of underlying problems here, which is what I'm trying to point to. So whilst the new administration thing, I totally get, sometimes does delay certain things, lose focus on certain things, the underlying problems have been bubbling for many, many years. And it's what, dare I say it, local government reform should have fixed, or should have tried to fix, and I don't think it ever did. The other bits just to highlight is the commercial property portfolio issue. So I think it was principally Mendip that borrowed a significant amount of money in order to buy a commercial property portfolio. Okay, so it was valued at 2.8. So this is the Phoenix Group and all of that work, which was kind of quite shrouded in secrecy. 289 million, I think, was the purchase value of that, and then 220 million is the thing now. Go on.
Thanks. I think it wasn't just Mendip that borrowed money to invest in commercial property in order to generate income at a higher rate than the loan was. Some of them were short-term loans, some of them were higher interest rate. We're finding that out. I think Sedgemoor did, South Somerset did.
That's good. Yeah, no, so that's fine. So apologies. It's been so difficult to track. Sorry, Mel. What did you sort of say?
Letting you finish rather than start the debate.
That's all right. Okay, that's all right.
Yeah, can I just say, if we wait for a while, then Max will take questions. And also, can I ask respectfully that people come through the chair rather than just
grabbing microphones. So collectively, I think the districts largely, put together a property portfolio. It is staggering to see that the value of that, if you like, a purchase of 289, which is done with the borrowed money, is now worth 220. So that, again, that gives you a sense of what can happen if you start speculating on commercial markets. And local authorities, and I work in quite a few of them, are just not well set up for this stuff. And they therefore can frequently take quite naive decisions, believing somehow that this is an easy way out. And very often it's not an easy way out. The decision has been taken, or the decision has been recommended in those budget papers to sell that portfolio now at that reduced rate. The only way that helps them, because that gives them capital money, not revenue money, is that they have to then ask the government for what's called a capitalisation direction. In other words, to use that money from the capital receipt to try and offset the crisis in the budget. But I guess that looks like it's the strategy almost. Sell the property portfolio, capitalise, and use it to try and avoid a 114 notice. I don't know, I'm not privy to those decisions, but that would seem like a relatively sensible, a logical way to respond to the crisis, because the 114 is a really, really difficult place to be. You lose so much freedom and so much possibility and movement. So it's all very depressing, I'm sorry to say, but my point here is that this has been a long time coming. It's been bubbling up for a long, long time. There are a number of different factors that come together to create the crisis that we are currently in. Last thing on Somerset context, there are also some practice issues. So there's some structural issues, but also things about the way in which people operate in the thing. So all changes in administration create a kind of degree of treading water when everyone kind of goes, oh, what's going to happen now? And shall I say something? Shall I not say something? Because there are new people in charge now, and all of that. So I've kind of lived through those kind of crises myself. So you can see in the movement from in the development and the implementation of the unitary business case, there's been some water treading, if you like, some lack of progress in relation to it. But I actually think that the overall impact of that is not huge. I would say, and people will know I was kind of involved in some of the counter bidders, I think the original local government reform proposition is not really based, not really based on public service reform, it's more based on efficiency, and I'll say something about that, more about that in a second. I don't think Somerset's ever really challenged its cost base. I think it spends an awful lot at its centre, and I don't think it's ever really looked at that properly. So the tendency, therefore, is historic cost budgeting and reductions in service lines, rather than to really deal with whether it's an efficient organisation or not. But that's all almost a sideshow compared to some of the real stuff that's going on. So a lot of this really stems from a lack of demand management and a lack of market management. And if you read the papers, this is kind of broadly what it says, that there that many of the services they provide to children are provided out of county at extraordinarily high cost because there's very little provision in Somerset. Colleagues were laughing the other day, but the chief executive of Cambridgeshire the other day was on the front page of Local Government Chronicle saying that one child cost him £85,000 a week. So he's got 6 carers. And we all go, oh my God, but that's actually not that uncommon. So the number of children that you would have in a £30 million budget deficit may not be that many. But that's the nature of the kind of services that you're doing. And if you've got no in-county provision, it's actually really difficult, therefore, to control your costs. And we also have a highly privatised children's services market, which is making many, many millions out of this, super profits on the back of some of these kind of care packages. There's a lot of inappropriate housing in Somerset. So a lot of people then get stuck in rather difficult housing conditions and therefore have to move out in order to be able to look after themselves. And lots of out-of-county children's provision, few what they call permanency solutions, so not much fostering, not much adoption, so people get stuck in care. These are the bigger issues, if you like, that need to be addressed. Otherwise, none of this stuff will go away. I would also argue that you need a devolution deal of the type that South Yorkshire have just negotiated in order to really drive growth in the area, to drive digital inclusion, to drive economic growth. All of those sorts of things. I can't see how Somerset can really survive long term without it, especially with its reliance on business rates. So until those things are fixed, I think the problem will keep getting worse. There's some underlying issues here and so when we begin to dabble in beginning to kind of provide services in the space and intervene in the space, we have to really understand what we're getting ourselves into. Poetry break. So this is by character called Rumi, who lived in the area that we now call Afghanistan. So he was kind of used to things going wrong and trying to make the best of them. So here's the poem. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if there are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honourably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. I'll be sending this to Bill Revens, who'll probably kind of text me back with a lot of question marks, like what on earth is this about? But I hope you get the idea that actually some of these, what feel like horrific challenges may actually be the springboard to something very different. And I suppose that's what I kind of just want to explore in my last few slides. The letter from Bill Revens is interesting for many of the reasons that Paul has already alluded to. He's talked about the crisis accelerating the devolution agenda, so many of the things that we hope to persuade them to do, it feels to me like now that bar will be lower, that they are looking for opportunities rather than looking for reasons to not devolve things to us. There is clearly an expectation that whatever we do, there will be more on our precept in order to be able to cover some of the gaps that inevitably will be left by the reduction that Somerset currently faces. We were previously operating under the assumption that anything that Somerset offered us would be at the kind of current cost. That's clearly not true. It'll either be at significantly less or none, would be my suspicion. However, and Paul's right, it's really difficult to make sense of the Bill Revens letter at the moment because all it does is it gives you a series of areas and you've got no idea what they currently cost. So it asks for our interest in specific headings, but it doesn't detail what those current costs are, what's delivered under those current costs, and it doesn't say either whether they intend to devolve or divest. So to devolve something means essentially they keep responsibility for it and you work on their behalf. To divest something means that they just don't have anything to do with it any longer. So there's a whole series of things on that list that if they were devolving them, feels quite attractive, and if they're divesting them, feels like a bit of a nightmare, to be quite honest. Okay, so don't people remember this slide? So this is our kind of nascent devolution scheme that we wanted to try and pull together some things around town centre, cultural quarter, economic development. We wanted to try and do things around early help. And we wanted to pull those two things together so that they had a positive impact on the county's difficulty and on our difficulty. So many of the things in the Reverend's letter sit directly in some of those circles. So they are things that we would potentially be interested in because they're right on board with our strategy. And I'm going to give you two examples of what this might mean. So one of the things on page, whatever it is, 5 of the letter, talks about services to children. So that's very interesting. The budget for children's services, of course, is massive and can't be devolved. So you can't outsource risk. You can't give safeguarding or child protection services to a parish council, quite rightly so. But there is a heading in that. So if you then go into the Somerset's budget book and you begin to look at how that breaks down, there's some quite interesting stuff. So there is a heading called prevention. And the amount that's allocated to that, which is news to me, is £5 million. What might that mean for us? Again, it's really difficult to know. But if you broke that down, if you say that Frome's population is about 5% of Somerset, it's 4.98% to be precise, and if you did a per capita distribution of that, then you end up with, nominally, there's a budget for prevention in Frome of £250,000, which is news to me, to be quite honest. You know, so, and so a lot of this, I think, what we'll end up doing is saying, really, do you? Do you spend that amount of money here? Do you really? Or is that kind of held in other places and spent centrally with no real impact on us? In which case, that activity over there, stopping, isn't going to be of much consequence to us, really. And if we can actually take some of the sum which is currently spent on it, it could actually be hugely beneficial to us. You know, would we back ourselves to, with all of the organizations that we work with, all of the tendrils we have into the community, all of the relationships and all of the networks that we know about, would we back ourselves to be able to deliver a better early help offer for 250k or even for 150k than is currently delivered? I think we probably would. So that's something that I think we should be saying, that's something we're actually really interested in. Could they walk away from early help altogether? I don't think they could, because they've got a whole Ofsted action plan, which is all about delivering in relation to those sorts of things. So I think it's actually really difficult for them to say it's got nothing to do with us any longer. So, however, we do need to know, is it devolving it or is it divesting it? And these are the conversations that we need to have. So we need to take all of the aspects of Bill's letter and say, what do you mean exactly? What's in scope? What's the current cost? And what are you trying to do with it? Because I think there are some areas that we would be incredibly interested in. Final thing to say, last thing is, and Paul was alluding to this as well, this is not just about budgets and assets. It could also be about powers. So one of the powers that I've been discussing with Mel is the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023. And one of the provisions in it is what are called forced auctions. So where you've got places which are where properties, landlords have deliberately kept properties vacant for over a year, local authority can, in certain circumstances, and I'll come back to this phrase local authority in a second, intervene in order to force an auction for rental. So in other words, you can force the landlord to let the property. And if I think about some of the stuff that we say about the town centre, would that be a power we would like? Yes, it is. What the guidance talks about is that power falls to the council responsible for planning and regenerative efforts for a given high street in which high street rental auction could be used. So that particularly lies with county at the moment, but it is absolutely something that we should probably be talking about doing on their behalf. Or indeed, even better than that, because actually I think it's going to be quite a difficult process to actually do that, but to work with businesses in order to avoid that situation arising in the first instance would be a far better thing for us to do. Those are just two examples, and Paul's giving you some others, where the crisis, if you like, and I'll end with, where the crisis may actually, in some ways, hasten an agenda that we've been wanting to pursue. This is not about taking on things blindly. This is not about taking on things that we shouldn't. We have to have our eyes open around it. But there are some absolute opportunities in this. We hope. I think that's what we need to pursue. It may well be that we end up in a lot of dead ends, but given the current situation, it feels like it's ripe for change. And so we should try and grab it with both hands right now. So that's it. In the report, there's lots of stuff about our progress against the strategy that we talked about, and I think we are in a much better place. The other thing to say that we've just appointed, we talked about appointing some consultants to help us think about this and help us think about a deal for the town. So we've just done that. We've appointed a group of people called activists. They're the same people that did the Glastonbury town deal, and they're really good at this stuff, particularly on repurposing libraries and thinking creatively about how assets might be used differently in the future. So it's a really difficult situation. It's been a long time coming. It won't be solved easily. There are some opportunities for us in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Max. That really is very thorough and obviously concerning. I'll take questions, and if there are lots, I'll take them in groups of 2 and 3 and 4. And can I remind you, as I used to say to my language students, if the person before you said it, you won't score full marks if you repeat it. Anne, and then Anita, please.
Thank you, Max. As you were talking, I was drawing analogies with households in the current cost of living crisis with a negative budget, aiming to sell off the family silver. That only works once. So they may well sell off assets, devolve assets, divest assets, however we want to put it, and that might solve the problem for 1 year, and then we're back to the same problem the following year. Also, I didn't see any mention there of social housing, so not commercial assets, but residential property, and the problems of right to buy has meant, because local authorities couldn't retain the assets, the money, the revenues from selling off their housing stock, so that caused a problem of those assets being sold off, and then that all going back to central government, and they're not being able to retain it. So, I've drawn lots of analogies. I'm not sure I've solved the problem, but you wouldn't, if a family is in a negative budget, selling off assets isn't a long-term solution to their problem. It's only going to be a short-term solution.
No, and I think that's one of the things I'm trying to say, is that we shouldn't, and I think I say it in the paper, we should not be panicked into crisis decisions which actually make no sense in the long term. We should be saying to someone, hang on a second, what are we trying to do? And having had debate, because clearly it feels to me like they're in panic mode. They can't, there's a section in the report that talks about, services have been asked to come up with savings and they've not done so. So there's a kind of sense in which there's no real traction that senior leadership have with services in the organisation, which is a kind of cultural issue. So, but there's a real danger that we just become part of the crisis in a way by just leaping in and not doing things in a thought out way. We need to think it through. We need to help them think it through, I think, around things like early help and prevention, because let's not pretend it's like those are not nice to have services, early help and prevention. They are what protects your statutory services. And if you cut them away, which is what's happened to a degree, you end up with the glut in demand which they've got at the moment. So we have to find a way in which we can return to a decent early help offer.
Thanks. I have Anita, then followed by Lisa, and then Mel, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Max, for that. Just a question. I have no idea whether it's feasible, but I mean, what do you think, in your experience, would be the possibility, considering that so many councils now are starting to get towards the edge, that there might be some thinking about possibly raising the cap on what they can do with their precept? Is that likely at all?
No sign of it currently. I think the government line is councils must live within their means. All of the legality is kind of developed in exactly that way. Then they point, as I did at the beginning, to all the councils that have fallen off the edge and say it's because they did something wrong. I think we are in this kind of grey area as to whether it's right or not. That's why I kind of did that national versus local thing kind of early on. It's a really difficult thing. It's like you can see that Somerset's in difficulty. Absolutely. You can see that some of the funding that's been available to it has been cut back. Absolutely. You can also see that it's made some quite significant with the benefit of hindsight, wrong turns, and it's very often in the face of those wrong turns that councils then can't cope any longer. So I doubt that you will get a blanket across the country increase in funding for local government. Local government always lags behind the NHS and other people, and in public sentiment, it holds no particular regard. Everyone wants to fund the NHS and save the NHS, and local government frequently kind of gets significantly cut for it. So right now, I'd love it, but I don't see any sign of it.
Because presumably, if they did raise the cap, and there could be a higher precept, that would actually take a lot of the weight off the government.
Off local government. Not in their eyes.
Okay, thank you. Lisa.
Is that working? Yeah, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Max, for all that work. Yeah, it is fair to say that we are in difficult times, where we're heading into increasingly more difficult times, and there's going to be some really difficult decisions, but also some incredible opportunities. And as Frome, we've never been the favourite child of Somerset. We've been left out in the cold a number of times, and the infrastructure that we have here gives us a really good basis and a support network, and we have a really strong sense of community, which I think possibly puts us in a better position than some of our other neighbours in Somerset. So there is a real opportunity to find ways of doing things differently, more efficiently, better. And we have a community that is excellent at that already. So I think, though we are going into worrying times, I think that we have the resources and the kind of experience and the infrastructure to support that reasonably well.
It feels to me like we have a better set of relationships now. Sure, it's to be tested, and I may be accused of naivety and all of those sorts of things, and leopards don't change their spots and all of that, but it does feel like we are very often singled out as the place to pilot things, as the place to trial things, as the place to start things, as the place to, all of that. And so, some of the stuff that's going on, Vision for Frome, the schools work, all of the stuff, the local community network we were a pilot for. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that I think suggests that we could have a much more productive relationship and less adversarial. Of course, that may not work, and we need to be prepared for it to not work and not be naive in relation to it. But again, it feels like a moment, like they need our help now. We are within that space, absolutely, and have built that up over numbers of years. And we have seen evidence sometimes of particularly new staff coming into Somerset and claiming what's happened in Frome for their own, and kind of saying, "Oh, look what we've done in Frome," and which, of course, we know that's not the case. So, we need to be very careful of all of those sorts of things. But it does feel like there's a decent set of conversations and relationships to be built on, and I know, Paul in particular is kind of front and centre of some of the thinking that's going on around parishes around Somerset about how we might respond to some of this. So again, that's a sign, I think, of regard and trust.
Thanks. Mel, please.
Okay. I've got 4 points to make. The first one being a little bit more controversial, just to bring in an adversarial element. And it's not about Somerset Council. Very few organisations, private or public sector, could survive a 40% reduction in income with a growth in demand for their services. So I wouldn't put the fault at the door of most of local government. And I don't think that we should be a barrier between ourselves and the government. So going back to Fiona's point, I think that sometimes we should show some anger about what's happening here. And somehow or other, the town council should get involved in that. Because if we were in France, we'd be out digging up paving stones and throwing them at anybody who passes, particularly if they're wearing a uniform. Now, I'm not saying we should do that, but there may be other ways that we could bring the community together and get them to express their disappointment of what's happening now, and also including the last 13 years, because as your graph showed, this started quite a while ago, and anybody with a brain could see where this was going to end up. So I think in future, I'd quite like us to be just a bit more angry in this chamber, and I'm quite happy to lead that if people would like me to. The second one is actually the task facing the Somerset Council is really huge, because if you look at it from the other side, do you know how many parishes there are in Somerset? 329. So they're going to get 329 responses. And I went to a small parish council meeting last night, and they denied that they'd even received the Bill Revens letter. They'd never seen it, and they didn't know what it was all about. So there's quite a long way to go. I mean, we've had a fantastic presentation here tonight, and no doubt we'll have future debates. But there's quite a long way for a lot of people to make responses that the Somerset Council has got in itself to respond to. So that's the second point. The third is, actually, I have been a commissioner some years ago in a failing Welsh council, and it was not an edifying experience. I was paid quite a lot of money, so that was good. But over a period of time, we met every couple of months. We totally ignored the council. In fact, the chief executive was thrown overboard fairly quickly, and most of the senior staff. And we made decisions as commissioners without asking anybody else what they thought, what the impact would be locally. We met every couple of months, and we made those decisions with the government, and it was, as I say, not a very edifying experience. So anybody who's suffering, commissioners in the future, gets my sympathy, I've got to say. They never invited me back again either. The fourth point is actually there are some opportunities, because if you get messages back from Cornwall that say the libraries, for example, are actually better than they used to be. They'll open on Saturday afternoon and Sundays. Some of them have opened cafes. They're using parts of the private sector, and they're using the assets and the space they've got more productively. And if we could do that with the library here and take on board that land in front of it, which Mendip have always claimed to own, but I'm never quite sure about that, then that would make quite a big difference in not only in the town centre, but perhaps in the services that are being provided from the library. I still have this dreadful fear that, the librarians say, don't touch those books, we've just put them on those shelves, and they're neat and tidy and in the right order. So that's probably unfair on most librarians. So that's it. So there's a lot to be wary of, there's a lot to be angry about, but we might find some new ways through this.
So I completely... one of the issues I've faced personally very often is that all of the political parties that I might get involved in that might be different to the one that's currently in power frequently stand centurion guarding a system that doesn't work any longer. And that's the difficulty that I kind of have personally with the whole thing. You just kind of go, I don't want to defend a whole bunch of, icons that I kind of don't really believe are working for people. And so I agree. It's like there are opportunities in this. The situation that brings it about is a really difficult one and a really unfortunate one. And I absolutely agree. 40% reduction in the face of increasing demand. Who comes out of that unscathed? Very, very, very few organisations do that, and that's the root of all of this. So yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And the powers of commissioners are frightening. And again, that's why we do, we can have conversations, we can have debates at the moment, we can work through the democratic process and have our county councillors present and talk about the things that we want to do. You will have none of that under commissioners. Max Caller, Dr. Doom, who's just gone into Birmingham, will just make decisions about Birmingham and will not consult a soul. That's absolutely right. And if anyone stands in the way, you can get rid of them. So it's a frightening prospect that we need to avoid at all costs.
Thanks, Max. I've got 4 more to go. Fiona, then Nick, Adam, and then Steve. Thank you.
I've got 3 points, so one less than Mel. I'm going to pick up on Mel's thing about anger, actually, and start with, and I think we just need to recognise that this is going to have a negative impact on pretty much everyone in Somerset and everyone in Frome. And as with everything, it will be the most marginalised and deprived, and the people with the least are going to suffer the most from this. And I think that sort of recognition needs to kind of be in our thinking. And while we talk about opportunities, I think we just need to keep that in mind, that this is, a real crisis. My way of thinking about this, or I was thinking about this the other day, and I keep thinking of, it sort of builds a little bit on what you said, Max, but I sort of think that the finances of Somerset Council are a black hole that are never going to be filled. And I think we have to be really, really careful that we don't try and get in that hole and fill it by upping the precept ourselves, because that black hole will never, ever be filled and it will just drain us. And I think the only thing that we can do that is of value is to try and stem the flow into that black hole. So that's where your early help and prevention comes in. And I think also we need to keep in mind long-term thinking, because that is not where Somerset is going to be. But I'm obviously going to, as lead councillor for climate and ecological emergency, I always think about that graph that came out around COVID of the waves. It was like Brexit was a small wave, then it was COVID, then it was, I can't think, how many crises have we had? Then it was the climate is the much bigger wave, and it is coming, and that is going to exacerbate all of the problems that we are talking about. Again, it's not going to be the children of the well-off that go hungry when there is food insecurity. It is going to be the children of those with less. And we might think that sort of our resilience team and our climate work is nice to have. I don't see it as that. I think it's essential. Somerset Council hasn't had any revenue budget in its climate work for I don't know how long, but it's gone anyway. So they haven't been able to do anything. So I think it's really, really important that we keep that long-term thinking and we just don't get sucked into that black hole. And the final thing I just want to say is, point 3 is I am feeling quite nervous about, I feel we're still talking a lot in theoreticals, given that we're now talking about we need to have some idea by January. That is 2 months away. And I'm not blaming anyone. I think you, as you picked up, Bill Revan's letter was really low on detail. And, you know, we're talking about really big decisions that are going to need a lot of thought and a lot of consideration. And we need time to be able to do that. And I'm concerned that we're still having sort of, conversations around, we could do this or we could do that. And I think we need to get, whether that's sort of putting in workshops for councillors, regularly or something, we need to get serious quite quickly, I think, about this and begin to really work through all the issues.
So I agree with all of that. To pick up on the point about getting to grips with it as councillors, the first step is to understand what on earth is being talked about in that letter. And then once we have that information, we can then have a meaningful conversation about it. Because otherwise we have no idea what children's services mean, what economic development services mean. We haven't a clue. So we have to kind of understand what's on the table, what's being offered, what is that a divestment or is it a devolution? Are they looking to save all of that budget or a proportion of that budget? Then we can have a decent conversation. But until then, this is theoretical and ideas and possibilities and things that align nicely with strategy and all of that. But we've got no idea what we're fishing in, really.
And I always just say that what you've done tonight is also really helpful in terms of context, because also we can't have these conversations unless I'm a big, you've got to understand the problem before you can, work out the solution. And so that's been really helpful. And also, it was a point I forgot about, was also, I don't think we should lose who we are as a council in this either. We are best when we are creative and nimble and working with the community and being a bit scrappy, I think. And I think that we need to make sure that we don't just try and become like a mini Mendip or mini Somerset, and we keep our identity.
Thanks, Fiona. I'm going to try and get the rest in, if I may. I've still got 4 minutes to go. Nick.
Just 2 points, you'll be relieved to know. Very quick. First of all, thank you very much, Paul and Max, for bringing this really useful discussion. Just a quick parallel. I and actually the man next to me were working in the Metropolitan Police when we had a change of government and austerity was brought in. Catastrophic, 40% reduction. We sold police stations, section houses, married quarters, and they're gone. Anne's point, once they're gone, they're gone. And then 7, 8, 9 years later, there's a bit of reversal, but the effect on service delivery at a neighbourhood level, catastrophic. Somerset, the average age of a service of police officers in Somerset is 3 years service. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And it's appalling, and it's something I take Mel's point, we should be very angry about this, very upset. Other point on the positive side is activists, these people you've involved, you bring in. I would love to have some kind of interaction with them about some of the. Okay, thanks very much.
Friday, I think. Oh, sorry, they land this Friday, I think, and that's one of the first things that we need to do is to kind of make sure that they know what we're trying to do with all of this. Because we've had some discussions about it, but I kind of think they would bring an additional kind of steeliness to it, which I think would be useful for us.
Adam, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I want to say thank you to Max for an excellent presentation. I'm glad you've explained everything so well, so I don't have to here or anyone else of us, because I've been doing that at parish councils recently. And I'll just say one thing you didn't, I don't think, touched on was the Fair Cost of Care initiative, which was one of the main reasons why the cost of care in Somerset has gone up so much, in some cases over 50% in a year, the cost of a bed for a week for an older person in a care home, because the government required the publication and an open book way of Somerset County and Somerset Council's costs that they were paying care homes and care providers for, and then with a view to paying for some of that and making sure that private clients wouldn't subsidise the council, and then they withdrew the funding proposal, so that costs on the table care providers can see, and care providers have increased costs from COVID, from Brexit, from all sorts of and energy costs, and surprise, surprise, the care costs have gone up 40-50% in some cases. That's one of the main reasons why we've got now a 70 million projected over budget in adult social care next year. That's one of the main particular reasons for Somerset, with all the other reasons you've mentioned as well. So it does make me think, well, you've got excellent creative ideas on children and young people's and prevention. Is there some way that the town council can think about helping prevention of care costs, preventing older people going into care in any way, active and in touch, and all the other brilliant things that we're doing through the social prescribing from the medical practice, and so that needs looking into, I think. There's the next few weeks, you'd say, well, we don't know the detail yet. I don't know the detail. No councillor does, because the officer teams are working out the detail. There is a deadline for reports going to the 6th of December executive at the end of November, when they will have more detail in proposed cuts. The ultimate deadline is the February full council, where a budget has to be presented, and if it can't be a valid budget by then the Section 114 will be issued. That's the deadline. Also, the local government settlement, which follows the autumn statement, that normally will projected to come out of the government in terms of how much funding they give to Somerset Council for the next financial year. That's probably Christmas Eve, because it's really late, and it's the last day before they go home for a few days. So we will know then whether the government gives a damn about Somerset local services. We will know then. Letters have gone from Bill Evans to Michael Gove at the highest level, from the chief executive into the department for levelling up housing in communities, and from Dean Ruddle, the councillor in charge of care, to the care minister Helen Watley. All the letters are going in explaining everything, so the government know what is happening and what they can help. What we basically ask them to do about it. And there's one more letter going in. It's an open letter. It's coming out tomorrow morning, if it hasn't already been published, from Bill Evans to the residents of Somerset, explaining the situation, going through it quite in some detail, and asking people to write to their MP, so that they can write to the government across Somerset, the 5 MPs, to emphasise the need for the government to act and help Somerset. So everyone can write to Sarah Dyke, and of course she will be on the side. She's part of the Somerset Council ruling party, like I am, I suppose. So also a working group, I think Fiona mentioned, it would be useful, I think, if we can have maybe a smaller forum to talk Frome Town Council, Somerset Council, all parties. Once the detail becomes available, there will be little time to really go through things in public meetings like this. But I thought that was a good idea. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to take 2 more. And do you want to respond to that? And then it's Steve, and last one, Shane. Thank you.
Thank you. Just want to respond to both Fiona and Adam, that we have had discussions. We've looked at how we can set up a working group, how we can bring councillors on board. But that first step, as Max has said, is getting that information so that we know what to do with it. But rest assured, there is a plan to kind of involve everybody in it. And make sure that we're bringing people with us. In addition to that, making sure that we look at the challenges and the opportunities through a number of different lenses, so that we're not just looking at it in terms of, what can we do with this asset, but then also looking at it in terms of what the needs of the community are, and layering those lenses to make sure that we're making really considered decisions, and that's a journey that we'll all be on.
Are you still there, Steve? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I do agree there's massive opportunities here, even though it's a bit of a car crash. Two very quick points, Max. Firstly, is the adult social care precept, you said on your very first slide, I think, Somerset was 7 and Dorset was 96. Is that capped at 5% as well, or what?
So it's a percentage of your overall council tax.
Right, so it is, yeah, you can't just...
So if your council tax is low,
you can't just...
your adult care, no.
No, fine. Second thing, sort of following on from something Mel said, if there's 30 plus councils around the country, you know, big councils, on the brink of... What if tomorrow morning they all decide, I sod this, and pulled the plug? I mean, does the government have 30 commissioners waiting in the wings to go and would they have to get men out of retirement? You know, I mean, yes. It's, you know, if all the councils got together and said, we've had enough of this, and pulled the plug tomorrow morning, surely that would create utter chaos countrywide.
So they just recruited 50 new commissioners? Which I like, you know, and someone in my position, you're going to go, but I just couldn't, I could not do that. I just felt like I couldn't, I know exactly what that role would be like. There's no way I would do it, sort of thing. But yes, they've recruited a lot of additional commissioners recently, weirdly enough.
Thank you. Well, I suppose it's encouraging that one area of the employment market's increasing. Shane, this will be the last one on this particular issue. Thanks.
Thank you very much. 6 points, but 3 of them have been made already now. First thing is, you know, that graph you showed about the pink bit gradually declining, the sort of non-statutory bit, you know, that for me just absolutely epitomises George Osborne's idea of getting government spending down from 42% of GDP to 35%. And that's what the coalition government did, and we are feeling the effects of it. Whatever council deals with social care, adult and children's, is going to be in deep, deep problems because the demand's growing and the central government grant isn't. So even if we make 100 million savings by February, it's not going to solve the problem because we will still be having a social care deficit in the years ahead. And why are, you know, the cost of social care, costs have risen from residential placement, £577 per week in 2023 to £850 per week now. As readers of Private Eye will know, residential social care is basically 2 companies. You've got the company that owns the building, which is very often a big hedge fund, offshore-based, dodgy tax situation, and then a management company that actually run it, pay huge rents to the offshore company, and they're always just sort of nearly going bust, so they push their costs up. And, you know, this is another throwback to closing council-run residential homes. We're just in this pickle. And I think we should be angry. This is not an accident. This is planned to happen, that it's basically cutting back what's left of the welfare state. You know, the Second World War's generation gift to us is being privatized. So I think we should be angry. I think whether it's a march on central government or really putting pressure on Labour, you know, I think that's the key thing at the moment. Labour have got to come up with better solutions, because I think it's unlikely that the government on Christmas Eve is going to come up with what we want. And some of the stuff that ID Verdi do around town is terrible. You know, they have 1 street cleaner as part of their contract. So I really do think there are opportunities that we could run things locally a whole load better than a French multinational does from Paris or wherever. So I think it is exciting that there's a lot of things we can take on. We've got to be careful, as said, that it's not just sort of doubling up the precept and the council tax budgets. You know, we've got to claw something back from Somerset if these things are going to be taken on. And the other 3 points have been made, you'll be glad to hear.
Thank you very much. Can I thank you all for your questions and your comments and your contributions? Thank Paul, but particularly thank Max for an excellent presentation. It's been very, very informative. Thank you, Max. Thank you. Item 6 now. Speed indicator device update and next steps following a serious accident on Rodden Road. This will be Jane and Anita.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you an update on the speed indicator device. Anita's got one already, which luckily its initials are SID, so that makes it much easier. And Anita's going to talk about the collision on Rodden Road and her recent meeting with the Avon and Somerset Police to talk about speed issues in Frome. So this slide shows you the locations of, where the SID is sited around the town. And as you'll see from the report, we have 15 locations, and the increase in the number of locations is in response to requests from residents. And just to say thanks to Rob and the Ranger team for moving the SID around the town and for downloading all the data. So to deal with the increase in the number of locations, we applied to Avon and Somerset Police Community Trust, and we've been awarded £5,000 so that we're able to buy another SID. Based on the advice from the police and Speedwatch, and thank you to Ashley for that, we're going to buy a smiley face SID. But Mel, you'll be pleased to know it also has an angry face. And this is slightly different from the existing one, which only shows you the speed. The last picture there shows you an auto speed watch unit. It doesn't issue fines or directly penalise people who are speeding. What it does is it collects data which identifies persistent speeders. That information is then passed on to the police and Speedwatch, who can take action, normally by writing to the registered keeper in the first instance. We did consider purchasing one of these, but as Anita found out at her recent meeting, the devices are not fully supported in Somerset yet, so it might be something that we'll consider in the future. This is an example of the data that's actually collected by the SID. This one's from Clink Road, where the speed limit's 30 miles an hour. It's recorded the speed of 34,300 vehicle movements over a period of 2 weeks. The average speed of 85% of those vehicles, currently 85% is considered to be a good metric, but I really can't explain what that means, was 31.5 miles an hour, although one person did go through at 60 miles an hour at 10 to 3 in the morning. So all of this data is shared with Highways, the police and Speedwatch, and if the data does highlight any specific concerns, then further monitoring of the area will be carried out by Speedwatch and the police. Now I'm going to hand over to Anita.
Thank you, Jane. Recently, following the collision on Rodden Road, being the ward councillor for Berkeley, which includes that road, I did actually meet with a lot of the residents who were very concerned about the level of speeding that they experience in that road and a lot of very unsafe driving. I did say to them that we would make sure we put pressure on Somerset and the police to take preventative action to improve the safety of what the locals actually call a local rat run. And it really can be quite dangerous if ever you've been through Rodden Road, as is the situation in Fromefield. I know we've got a Fromefield resident here with us this evening, and as well as the Butts and several other places in Frome. We really do have a major speeding problem. So some suggestions that came out of that meeting were that the residents of Rodden Road themselves would actually create a group calling themselves Rodden Road Speed and Safety Group, where they would undertake activities such as any gathering photographic evidence or anecdotal evidence, which might all help the case. And they would just do everything they can to take some active steps towards helping the safety in the road. Another thing was that they volunteered to become community speed watch operatives. And I'm very pleased to say that out of the number of people I met, 11 of them have actually volunteered to become community speedwatch people. Clearly, the next steps for that will be to make sure that the police look at the area to find safe places for people to stand, and make sure that it will work in terms of having visibility from the speed guns to be able to operate safely when you've got parked cars on the road and those sorts of things. But it's wonderful to know we've got so many people actually willing to stand up and not just talk the talk, but walk the walk as well. So that's really encouraging. Some of the other suggestions that came through from that group were that we could talk to Somerset Council about maybe double yellow lines in appropriate locations. Some of those areas, particularly in Rodden Road, being on a bend which occurs halfway down the road, because at that stage often there are vans parked regularly there, which makes visibility almost impossible. And of course, it was on one of those bends where we had a very nasty accident recently. And so double yellow lines would be one of the things that could be considered. They wanted to talk about making it a 20-mile-an-hour zone. But we know, and Jane will talk through the difficulties with that sometimes, and that these things are never quite as easy as they sound. They asked for a pedestrian crossing from the footpath to Rodden Meadow, which is about halfway along Rodden Road as well. And again, it's fine to be able to ask Somerset for these things, but there is always a price to pay, and it's not always just financial. There was also a suggestion of putting planters in the road to help alleviate some of the speeding that goes on there. And Jane will perhaps talk to you about some of those options and what Somerset's view is on those.
Thank you, Anita. Yes, I thought it would be helpful just to give you a brief explanation of what would be required to implement some of those things and the potential costs of those. So for a 20-mile-an-hour zone on any road in Frome, 85% of the vehicle speeds would need to be currently below 24 miles an hour. Speed data would need to be taken to establish the current speeds, and if the speeds are an average speed of 24 miles an hour below, it can be changed to a 20-mile-an-hour zone. This would require signing and lining, and depending on the length of the zone and various other factors, that would cost around £15,000 per zone. If, however, the average speed is over 24 miles an hour, it can still be changed to a 20-mile-an-hour zone, but would require additional speed calming measures. We or Somerset would need advice from traffic engineers on what type of calming measures would be appropriate on any given road. If we assume that the measures would be planters and signage like the image on the screen, or if you like the equivalent of school streets, that scheme could cost approximately £2,700, and that doesn't include design costs. So it's not quite that simple to just put in 20 mile an hour. Is that what I said? 277,000. Thank you, Fiona. Yes, yeah, potentially. And talking about pedestrian crossings, again, would need to look at design costs, and that could be up to £140,000. Helpfully, I did find a guide list of prices for various highway works, not published by Somerset, but by Wiltshire, I believe. And actually, that does correlate to all the costs that we've been working on. So yes, so Somerset Highways must really carefully prioritise the works, any works, in line with limited budgets available. This involves making some very difficult decisions to make sure that their resources are directed where there is clear evidence of significant problems or incidents. However, where there isn't clear evidence of significant problems or incidents, they've also been very clear that town and parish councils would be required to pay for any traffic schemes. We can request double yellow lines. At the moment, Somerset do cover the cost of those, but double yellow lines will require a traffic amendment order to install them, and the next amendment won't be for about a year. Then that has to go through an advertising process. So even if we request double yellow lines and it's agreed they can go in, there will be a delay in that actually happening. What we can do relatively quickly ourselves, assuming that we get all the relevant licenses, is to locate the SID along Rodden Road and install some kill your speed signs. I forgot to move the slide for that one, so, so I'll hand back to Anita.
Thanks, Jane. I recently met with the police at their headquarters in Portishead, with a lot of the road safety people from Somerset and Community Speed Watch, and a lot of things were discussed because, and I was thinking primarily at that stage, it was long before the Rodden Road accident, of what had happened on the bypass. So there had been a call from residents about applying a speed camera in that area. And I don't know if it is well known, but I wasn't aware. Apparently Somerset would actually need confirmation of 3 deaths in that spot, as well as numerous injuries, all of which it would have to be proven that they were actually caused by speeding. So even if you have 3 deaths, if they weren't caused by speeding, that would not be enough to justify a speed camera, which seems remarkable. And my first instinct was, well, regardless of what causes something, if you've got a fast road, why would you be waiting for people to die? But this has been just a new directive, yet again repeated by the Department of Transport, that it must be the very last action they take, having looked at other things like road signage and what have you. So speed cameras, which cost about £50,000 a time, would definitely be out of the question in terms of any of the roads that we're talking about in Frome, regardless of the fact that we've got a huge speeding problem. The LC Whip, which we're working on at the moment, has developed a very comprehensive set of design recommendations, which would improve a lot of the conditions for walking and cycling, for instance, and integrating with a lot of existing initiatives in the town. And that would include 20-mile-an-hour zones, is something they're promoting town-wide, although there is a lot of debate within the police about whether that's a good or a bad thing. I think each town is looked at on its merits, so that's something they would have to approve, having looked at Frome and whether we actually warrant such a thing. But there will be, again, improved facilities for cyclists, improvements to junction and those sorts of things, which will all help, but they're not necessarily the solution. There is no funding from Somerset Council towards the LC Whip. So again, that would have to be funded through government grants or S106 money. But to deliver all the recommendations they've come up with, we're talking about a possibility of around £6 million. So we're talking huge figures here, really. We have raised our concern with Somerset about how they respond to residents requesting highway works or traffic restrictions. And the response from the traffic management to members of the public and to Sarah Dyke implies that Frome Town Council is responsible for approving and funding such requests, which seems extremely difficult under the circumstances. We don't actually have the facility to, or the authority to approve or offer the funding to deal with. And I think all of this actually raises false expectations for the public. So, you know, it's an extraordinary thing for them to say, I think. I did actually just want to come to one quick thing before I finish and pass back to Jane. We've got a Fromefield resident here, I know, who's come specifically for this part of the meeting tonight. And Tony, you actually posed a question that you wanted us to look at here, and that was very much about the 20-mile-an-hour limits, etc. Okay, is that on the back? Okay. So you said, regarding this evening's meeting, I would be grateful if you could answer at the meeting the following question. Why is it that the Somerset villages Beckington, Bucklanddenham, Wellow and Norton St. Philip?
Sorry, Anita, I only printed page 1.
But it was very much around why those villages have been granted the 20-mile-an-hour zone, and that you were very concerned that even if there was a 20-mile or the 20-mile-an-hour limit put in, where the speeds were over 24 miles an hour, there would need to be other devices in the road, like speed bumps and things like that. And you know that your feeling was that they themselves can cause considerable damage to buildings as well as anything else. So I know Jane has actually talked to Somerset Council about a lot of those things, but regarding the 20-mile-an-hour zones in the villages, the answer was that these schemes have been in place for quite a while, and that the rules and criteria about granting 20-mile-an-hour zones now have changed considerably since they were granted. Those schemes apparently were most likely carried out through the small improvements scheme, and those were championed by county councillors who each had a budget for small improvements. Unfortunately, that small improvement scheme has since ceased, which means that it's no longer possible to take on any new schemes recommended and paid for by councillors. So we understand that Somerset have assessed the speeds at Frome Field as being over 24 miles an hour, and therefore, if it was to be installed, additional traffic calming measures would be required. Somerset are not in a position to fund it, and clearly Frome Town Council is not in a position to fund that level of money. But we will, of course, as I have explained to you, that we will be putting Frome Field on the rota for the speed indicator device. And hopefully we're looking into some kill your speed signs, all of things that we can do around the area, which would hopefully help in the first instance. Okay, so did you want to come back on it before we continue?
I think so, yes. If you could just identify yourself and use the microphone, please. Thank you.
Field. Just to go back over Jane's criterion for a 20-mile-an-hour zone, did you really say that they had to be driving slowly in order to get a 20-mile-an-hour zone? That seems to me to be about as balmy as I can imagine.
Yep, that is exactly what I said. In short, that I understand the reasoning behind that is because if there were no speed limits in place, people will naturally drive to the road conditions and their environment, which is why they're 30 through towns, etc. If you don't do something to physically slow people down where they're not already going slowly, then actually just putting in signs to say it's a 20-mile-an-hour zone won't necessarily slow the traffic. So, but yes, you're right, that is pretty much.
But you have 20 mile an hour the moment you get to Welsh Mill into town. Why don't you just extend it to the co-op?
Yeah, I mean, I know Somerset Council have looked at this, but because they've judged, or because the information that they have on the speeding states that traffic is travelling over 24 miles an hour, you can't just extend the sign. You would have to put in physical intervention such as speed bumps or planters.
Okay, every day I see the school kids coming up Froomfield, and there are hundreds of them, and they're in the road mostly. The path's very narrow. You're looking at a disaster waiting to happen.
I don't think any of us disagree with you. I just have to explain the process.
Oh, I understand. I understand that. And someone's going to die.
I think that this is also the argument that the police have about 20-mile-an-hour limits, is that in a sense you have to look at each place on its merits, but what their claim is that really you should be considering what is naturally intuitive to most drivers, i.e., as Shane said, following the conditions of the road, being sensible and those sorts of things. And if you start to put 20-mile-an-hour limits in places around the town where there is a slightly more open space, it will be completely disregarded. And as a consequence, far better to focus on those areas that do need that limit, which is why we've written to Somerset on your behalf and all the other residents' behalf to see what we can do. But there are limitations, and that's what we're stuck with, sadly.
We have 2 schools in a zebra crossing, and they do 60. And by the way, I've how you report problems through the app. There's 2 school signs in Fromefield. One of them they managed to fix. They ignored the one that was a bit further down. So one of the ways they waste money is they send people twice to do one job, which is, I'm not surprised they're going bust.
Thank you. Can I just say, I've got gentleman here and then Fiona. You want to respond to that?
Very quickly, if you don't mind. One of the other things that I was advised by Somerset today was that they do on the Avon and Somerset Police website, there is actually the facility to upload video footage of people who are speeding or driving dangerously. And Somerset would like us to encourage people to do that, because actually where there's anecdotal evidence of problems, the speed data shows that people are going over 24 miles an hour. The more evidence they have to demonstrate that there really is a serious problem there, be that through people's statements or video footage, which is actually more helpful to them, the better case they can build to try and put interventions in. So unfortunately, I didn't put the details of the website on my presentation, but I'm sure we can put that on details on our website somewhere. So please, if you can capture video footage, it can be dash cam footage on your mobile phone or even from a Ring doorbell. If it's uploadable, they will look at it.
Thanks, Jane. So.
Thank you. Those that don't know me, I'm Ashley Ray from the Mendip Community Speedwatch. I can give you some updates on Rodden Road. I was there last week with the police officers and we had a look at the site, and the police will approve a site for Community Speedwatch in Rodden Road, providing they have what the average speeds are. I see all this 45 miles an hour, 60 miles. So the cop said to me, well, where'd you get that from, Ashley? And I go, well, I didn't get it from anywhere. They said it was in the paper. Somebody must have put it there. So if we're going to do these things, it needs to be accurate, not just pluck it out the air. Because, how fast is that pen going? I've got no idea. We do need to be accurate, get the SID up, put it up for a week or two, etc. And you will find somebody doing 60 at 3 o'clock in the morning down Rodden Road or any other road in Frome. So the team's coming in. I've looked on the police system tonight, and lots of volunteers are coming in. That's good from Rodden Road. As soon as they're all CRB approved, as soon as you get some data, it'll probably be sufficient for site to be approved by the police, and speed enforcement will go as well. So that'll be 2 wins for us, Frome, which is good. So that's positive news, etc. I should tell you, unfortunately, Frome is getting a very bad reputation for speeding. You can say, well, it's the same in Bath or Timbuktu or Bolton or whatever it is, but it's getting more and more. When I go with the police officers and the car physically slows down and looks at us and waves and goes off down the road and gets caught for speed, I have no answer for that. I really have no answer. And you've all talked about monies and budgets and cutting down and this sort of thing. Why do you want to give the government £100, 2, 3? Why would you want to do that? Everybody looks at me and goes, yeah, you're right. Nobody takes any notice at all. I fear for you in this town. The police are looking at this in a really serious light, and that will mean lots of cops and lots of visits and lots of fines and lots of moaning from the motorists. Haven't you got any better things to do? But there you go. So let's end with a positive note. Rodden Road, going to be fixed, hopefully. Please get that SID up. Let me have the data ASAP, even if it's only for a week's data, and hopefully we can pursue things for you.
Thank you, Ray. Fiona.
Sorry, do you want to go back on it?
Yeah, just really on your point about getting the data, I think once we've got the SIDS installed in Rodden Road and Froomfield, we'd be able to know a lot more about the accurate speeds that are recorded. And I know Jane's already sent off for permission to cite those SIDS. So, and they're usually turned around pretty fast. So as soon as we get that permission, I think it's only fair under the circumstances to talk about bringing Rodden Road and Froomfield a little bit higher up the list, and we'll prioritise those two so that we can get that data as quickly as possible.
First of all, I just want to say thank you to Anita, who's been doing such amazing work on this issue for a really long time and has really sort of championed it, and you're doing an amazing job. The other thing I want to say is we've just sort of heard from both Anita and Jane how expensive all of these interventions are and how hard it is to get funding for them. And off the back of School Streets, Sustrans have managed to get funding for two toucan crossings at the Butts and on Broadway. They are two of the crossings that when there was a bit of work done before my time, sort of 4 years ago, they came up as high priorities for Frome. But they've got the funding, they've got the designs, they've got the funding to implement it. But the money needs to be spent by September 2024, and we cannot get Somerset Council to approve this and to agree to work with us. So I'm actually saving myself a call. Adam, you were on my list to call this week to ask for your support in that. Peter Wheelhouse emailed David Carter a couple of weeks ago and didn't get a reply back. But the money is there. We have it. It's from the Department of Transport. It's in the bank. We just need that approval to do it. And then that's two ticked off. And I know it's not a lot, but it's something, and we can do it. So Adam, if you could help us on that, it would be appreciated.
Thank you, Fiona.
Can I reply to that? Okay.
We're slightly digressing if we're talking about school streets. We're moving away.
You're not great.
Sorry, we're slightly digressing if we're moving into school streets. So I would actually say, could we leave that discussion that you have that later together? That'd be good if we could keep on to this point. I've got one more. Dawn, please.
Yeah, so the website is actually near misses. So if you just go to Avon and Somerset Police near misses, you get a link where you can upload anything that is a near miss that you think would be useful for evidence. And then the other thing is, thanks to Ashley, I've been put in touch with the night enforcement officer, and he is a super duper night van, and nobody ever knows he's there, but he was out on opposite the Berkeley School last week, and he caught loads of people doing 50 miles an hour, so they've got court appearance letters. They're not even getting a fine. If there are safe places around Frome where you think he could park, let me know, and we'll get him out to do some night surveillance around the town.
Thank you, Dawn. I think on this very serious issue, I think everyone's pretty much in agreement. So you have the recommendations on the screen there, if you've read those. Did you want to come back, Adam, quickly? Thank you.
Thank you. Just to clarify, the speed monitoring that Ashley referred to as being required, can that be done through the SID being up, or as in Froomfield early this year, I think, it was done separately by radar on the lampposts? To get the actual monitoring, doesn't matter. Okay, that's great. Another question is, please don't write off the idea of a 20-mile-an-hour zone through Froomfield. I know Tony's been campaigning on that for quite a while. A lot of the residents have been interested in that for a while. Also, a former town councillor in the previous administration promoted it, and a survey found that most people there would like it. The narrow section of Froomfield is, I think, an ideal candidate for 20, but it does mean the town council extending the 20 into new areas, maybe Rodden Road as well. That's where I live. So I'd be happy with that, but please don't write that off. And obviously at the moment, the Somerset Council budgets don't stretch to discretionary speed limits. Beckington is getting one looked at for their village as a whole through responding to the request, and they're paying some money up front. Road is getting one soon under the previous scheme. So it's obviously something that a lot of residents will want to see. Obviously it needs planters, it needs bumps or something, but please don't just to say no to that.
Thanks very much, Adam. Okay, thank you. Just one very last point, very quickly, please.
The cost of the SID is £5,000, but it's a shop sign with a sensor and a computer. I mean, that's crazy. That you're being really overcharged for that.
The total cost of the unit itself is around £3,000. The brackets, the solar panel, etc. It's not £5,000, but unfortunately we have to pay the market price for it. We can't get them any cheaper.
I'll make you one.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we please then look at the recommendations? Are we, I know Nick is, are we happy with those? Proposed, Nick Dove, seconded, Fiona Barrows. All those.
That's unanimous.
Thank you. Can I echo what Fiona was saying earlier on for Anita, all the hard work that she's done, and for Jane in this presentation this evening. Thank you both very much. Thank you all those of you in the room for attending this evening. Thank you for those online. Thank you, team. And the next meeting will be at 7 p.m. on Wednesday, the 6th of December, 2023. Thank you all very much. Enjoy your evening.